to prioritize self-care in your life and what that looks like for you. You had a bumpy start in life and, at some point had to, I'm sure, walk things out and figure out how do you take care of yourself through all of that? So talk to me about your self-care journey.
So it's evolved and changed over the years for sure. I talk a lot about being resilient. And although I think there's a little bit DNA in that, I also think it's like a muscle that you can exercise and get better at it. And I attribute my adoptive mother for helping me. I remember as a teenager, however, it drove me insane that she would sit me down. She's like, Tori, we need to unpack and understand, why are you feeling the way you are and doing the things you're doing? That self-reflection is a big part of what's helped me from a self-care perspective, to understand the feelings and emotions that I was having and why, and then starting to lean into the thoughts, language, action to kind of model the behavior or thinking that I wanted has been a big part of that.
Sure.
But then the other thing was, and this came later in life, was learning how to create boundaries to protect the time to devote to self-care.
Yes.
And for me, like, I'm a fitness fanatic, and that's actually my time, not only to do good for my body, but actually that's the time where I spend thinking about things and analyzing the prior day or what I'm going to do. And so that time for me, for example, is sacred. So for me, my calendar is blocked in the morning. So no one books me for an early morning call, or even as I've just stepped out of the shower and look like a wet dog, right? So that's one way. And then the other would be just learning to ask for help, when you need it.
Oh, yeah. That's so powerful, because I think people let a surface look of someone's life tell them more than what is probably actually true. People would go to your website, go to your profile. I'm like, she has got her stuff together. She's going to tell me how to do things, but there's no way she needs help. She's got it all figured out. And I think it's so important to remember we all need help sometimes. And sometimes we need help so we can help. I think there's so much power in that. And we'll get into the boundaries piece later, but I know what you mean about getting that workout in. I get my best ideas and my best thoughts after I've had a really good workout where I've sweat, I've moved. It clears my mind and it makes room for new ideas and fresh ideas. I'll many times get back to the house or stop what I'm doing, depending on kind of work I'm doing. And I'm grabbing for a notebook to write down all the things that came to me during that time. But also put it in your calendar. I think we get weird sometimes of like, it's not self-care if I put it in my calendar. No, it is, because you're making it a priority. You blocked out that time and you send a message to the world that no, this time is for me. So I'm so glad you brought that up. I think that's so important. You already talked about this, confidently setting boundaries. At what point, talk to me about your boundaries journey. At what point did you realize this was something you needed to institute, and how did you get there?
Well, so for me, boundaries, Melissa, is a couple of things. It's one, not just the pure confines we think of and the rules. For me, it's actually the expansive nature of that. So as a child, I knew that no one was going to tell me how far or wide I could possibly go. I was determined to be better than the biology or the circumstance. And so I determined that for me. And so that is sort of the offshoot of thinking about boundaries really wide and expansively. So that came very young. And then the second one, which now is the one where we think about how do you, and I kind of hate the question I get asked all the time, like, how do you fit it all in? How do you do it all? And I'm just like, it's all just life for me. And so I have this saying where there's conviction, there's capacity. And so people who say they're like, I can't do it, or whether it's they want to start a new business or this or that. And I'll say there's your 9 to 5 and then there's your 5 to 9. Like, you make choices over how you spend your time.
Yeah.
And that there's going to be compromise. So there's times where I've needed to make decisions for my family over career and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And then I also have the saying with my team, and it was long before COVID, there are no schedules, there's just deliverables. And so I've always given the time and space for the team to work remotely. If you need to take a child to a doctor's appointment or, to a soccer game or take care of an aged parent, like, don't ask me for permission for that. We just have deliverables to one another and to our clients or customers.
Yeah.
But then the last thing I would say around boundaries is there are in, creating capacity for the things that I have conviction about or I'm passionate about does mean saying no sometimes. So I've learned to say no, to delegate or to outsource the things that don't bring me personal or professional joy or value.
Yeah. I think that's a really good delineator too, because I think sometimes as women, we feel like, there's a cultural expectation that we're just supposed to show up and be all and end all. And we've got to stop and start. Our bodies will tell us, our minds and bodies, we will feel it if we are not aligned and passionate about and convicted. Use such an important word, convicted about that. And we got to trust that too. I think that's so important, and being willing to say no within that. Taking care of our emotional health as much as our physical health. We talked about it earlier. Your beginning was bumpy. You came from a very traumatic early background. We're talking about boundaries being violated. They were blown up, and you, luckily, you talked about your adoptive mother, but there had to be, I would imagine, some emotional, physical, mental health connections that you've kind of walked through throughout your life. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, I have one of my hashtags I sign off my social media posts with, but really it's sort of my life's philosophy is about being unstoppable. And that comes from severe trauma and adversity in my youth. So I'm born to a drug addicted teenage mother who was really abusive to me. So I was in and out of her care. My adoptive parents actually knew her. And so the last words my biological mother, Julie, said while I was in her care was calling the woman that later adopted me and said, "Come and get her before I kill her." Oh, wow. And so those were the first several years of my life. Wow. And they scarred me physically and certainly emotionally. I lived in fear of being rejected and being hurt by the people that, love me the most. I remember my mom, and my mom is the woman that raised me. So Julie is my biological mother, and my mom is the woman that raised me. Yes. And I remember my mom saying to me, Tori, stop pushing us away. We're not giving you up, right? It just, but I feel like I then put myself in sometimes precarious positions. I was raped at 14 and then just had a series of other things that created all of these moments for me of trauma and created the insecurity, the fears and whatnot that I needed to, learn how to move past. Yeah. And as I said earlier, I think my mom was a great woman who taught me how to be really self-reflective and understanding the emotions. It took me many years, not because she didn't talk to me about how to do it, but until I think I was confident enough in who I was and in my own skin to start to learn how to process those. I think I learned to compartmentalize and just kind of move it over to the side and just keep going on. And I needed to learn to just dig a little deeper in understanding those emotions and get comfortable with some of the things that made me really uncomfortable, because without doing that, I think the growth would never have come.
Yeah. And I think there's a sense of safety that has to come with that. I don't think we can dig into those things and sit in those hard things until there's our nervous system and our body feels a sense of safety. Would you say that had a lot to do with it too? When you got to the point where you're secure enough, was there a safety factor for you?
Yes and no. I actually think, I think I got comfortable with the fact that things could continue to hurt me, but I knew I was confident enough in who I was and my ability to deal with that I was okay to put myself back out there to do the things that were uncomfortable and could potentially create other challenge or adversity for myself.
Sure. And I think when choice too, feeling like, okay, I've got a power of choice. I don't have to be a victim of my circumstances. I can walk this out. I have choice. I have power in that. I think, your life is a reflection of that, and you taking hold of that and grasping onto that. And that's really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I sign off social media with is no excuses, which I will tell you drives my children nuts. But it actually comes back to that. We have a choice in terms of how we are going to respond when challenge, adversity, trauma comes our way. And I want everyone to feel deeply the emotions so you can process and move forward. But then the choice is yours.
Yeah.
You can sit in the victim mentality and be unable to, put one foot in front of the other and move towards whatever positive outcome or objective you have, or you can choose the other path. And so that, for me, a big part of this unstoppable nature is just making choice in terms of, how I'm going to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So much strength in that. And in conviction, it goes back. I think conviction is a word that is such a great descriptor of how you approach things. And because it's not easy, it takes courage to do this. It takes courage to put that foot forward, especially when you come from the, places that you come from and experiences that you started off at such an early age. But this next thing, you do this in your work. This is your work described, but talk to me how we can support ourselves and other women in living unapologetically. This is you in a nutshell. And this is the work that you do in the world, and you do it beautifully. So talk to me about your path of knowing, and we're going to get this through a minute because you just busted. We'll talk about expectations soon, but you just busted through expectations. You were a high profile, position at 24 years old, and you started, and you live in a multi-sectional way as a woman. There's more than one, aspect of these, of your identities that inform the kind of work you do. But talk to me about that unapologetic, because I look at you and I read your bio, I listen to you, and unapologetic and conviction are the things that come to be. So how did you get to the point where it's like, I can do this and I can also help other women do this too, and in their work and in their life and in their everything they do every day?
Yeah, my sort of origin story, it was what made me, think I'm going to be better than biology or circumstance. So I knew I wanted to achieve. I didn't know what it was. I thought I was actually going to be a lawyer, but then I fell into the world of business and leadership, and I loved that. So I followed that path. And so that first role for me, that executive role at 24, I was also a brand new mother.
Wow.
So by choice, I made a decision to have my children fairly young. So my first was born just a few weeks shy of my 24th birthday. And then a couple months later, I became COO. And I started working at a very early age, at age 11 in a hair salon. By 14, I was the assistant manager of the shoe store I worked at.
Wow.
So my leadership, role, and then continued on that path. And the one thing I was in control of was how I showed up from a work perspective, performing, improving my skills, going back to choice. Those are mine. So continue to develop myself to do well from a career perspective. It was a big stretch role for me. Mm-hmm. But that first role taught me a lot about leading in business, just the dynamics of that business. But it was also where my conviction around fighting for diverse and underrepresented groups came from. So I was the youngest executive by at least probably 2 decades.
Oh, I'm sure.
I was the only woman in the room and the only queer person as well. So I, came out as bisexual at 14. I was married to a woman for 11 years whom I gave birth to my 2 children while married to her. Okay. And I'm now with my husband for 10 years. But at the time, I, very proudly brought my wife to corporate events. So I realized I felt like I was the only, and I always had this, that my early years, what I dealt with and socioeconomic, my parents had very, very little money. So I had all of these things where I just felt I was insecure and I was the only person there. So that began my my fight for others. To make sure they didn't feel that way, but also because that first business I was in was a heavily people intense business. It was a what's called business process outsourcing, BPO business. So think like call centers, customer service, technical support, that kind of thing. So very people intensive and usually not like the destination job for many new immigrants to the country or people who are in between go there. And so keeping them engaged and wanting to, perform, man, I needed to create a really great environment. And there was significant diversity. As I said, lots of new immigrants as well from all, around the world.
Sure.
And so in addition to fighting for women or anyone in the LGBT community, it was also for all of these different diverse constituents.
Yeah.
So for me, I've been speaking for 20 years. The first 10 was probably almost exclusively around business related topics at conferences.
Yeah.
And then as I began to mentor more and more often women, because I usually lead the what are called business or employee resource groups within our organizations, coaching lots of women and telling my story, talking about the challenges of being a wife, of being a mother, of being an executive. And then also some of the things as I got older, I'm like, here's the things I wish I could have told my 24-year-old self.
Yes.
And so imparting those things. And so that's also when my speaking shifted to be much more personal, still often very business related, but with these elements of my own personal story, because I felt I would do a disservice to others. And so I stand in front of women. I do one-on-one coaching and mentoring conversations to help others. And I'm a big believer in this, to lift others as you rise.
Yes. Yeah. And it's getting rid of that scarcity mindset. I think until we as women can collectively embrace that, there's enough room for all of us. And when I lift you up, it inspires you to lift somebody else up. When you see me living unapologetically, it gives me permission and license and community in doing that as well. And I think that's just such an important thing. And I love what you do with that. And it's powerful. It's palpable. I feel your energy with that just from this conversation, and we're talking through a screen, and it's contagious. And I think that's something we have to remember that's so important. I'm going to go a little bit out of order here because I think it's important in the context of our conversation. I'm going to go into the living out of your own expectations, which you do undeniably well. And so I want to hear about your expectations journey when you got to that point. And then also too, you've done a lot of DEI work. That's getting kicked around right now. We are in a state in the United States, specifically, especially right now, where that's getting kicked around right now. So talk to me about not only the unapologetic piece, but the expectations piece as we deal with these. We continue to confront these issues that are we're running uphill a lot with these things. So how do you approach that? How do you communicate around that when it comes to both the expectations and this important work that you do in the DEI space?
I have a sort of a phrase I use quite a bit, and very much when it comes to DE&I work, and that's strategic intentionality. And so, yes, DEI has been, for the last, I'm going to say 15 or 20 years when they started creating, employee and business resource groups, for these underrepresented minority groups within the workplaces. And then we saw this crazy amplification and crescendo around it, particularly post George Floyd, for those of your listeners who are in the US. And actually the chief diversity officer became one of the most newly created roles that people were searching for. But it's not the chief diversity officer's job. Like, we all own it.
Yes.
There's a single person who can help craft policies and programs and report on progress, but they don't own it alone. We all do. And so, for me, that means advocacy. It means the strategic intentionality piece means it's woven into all that we do across the organization. I think there's this myopic lens around recruiting diverse talent into the business. And then it's like, okay, well, good. But then there's nothing done to create this inclusive environment to keep them there.
Right.
So in many cases,
they want to stay.
Right. So in many cases, you'll see them running out the back door as fast as we might be able to bring them in. And so we all need to aware of that. And so that means we're creating a lot around that, even just making sure the products or services we, sell as part of the businesses we work for, are they inclusive? Like what markets are you trying to? And then I also don't think it's just the leaders that own it. As much as I said, the chief diversity officer doesn't own it, we all own it. But by that, our voice is our power. So even for like new employees in the business, when you see something, say something, within it. So I think that's really important. And then also just this notion of allyship. I recognize I still have incredible privilege. I'm a white woman who was born in North America. Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm a woman in business, and we're very, still only 53 of the Fortune 500 companies, CEOs are women.
Wow.
Only 6 are Black.
Wow. That's a lot of work still to do.
Right. But I still have privilege. So I think there's a lot of work that, we should. So for me, plowing through means in my workplaces, and I'm fortunate that I actually get to consult and talk to other business leaders as well around how they should do it within their organizations. Mm-hmm. I'm building the right kind of culture, environment, policies, and procedures. But then also I'm out there advocating. So even, today I posted, and by the time this will be released, this will be long, they'll have to go search in the archives, but around, the Supreme Court decision last week around affirmative action, or the anti-LGBT one around building websites and, to those who sell cupcakes or whatever, it was like, my position is to say something and to support, my community members, my family, my friends, and others in raising my voice to power.
Yeah. And I think it's so ironic to me that decision fell the week before the 4th of July, because the 4th of July is such an interesting holiday. I also am a very privileged white cisgendered woman, but I've become a learner over the last 10 to 15 years and really trying to learn as much as I can and embrace the actual truth about our history. And it's just a reminder of like, yes, we have these things that we strive to, but we're not there. And there's a lot of work. There's a very small percentage of people in the United States that actually have the freedoms that are talked about. And so, yes, this happened on this day and all that, but there's work to do. But showing up for each other. And, again, like you said, just giving a voice to it, speaking up and knowing that you're there for the long haul. This is not something you're going to dip in and out of. I think we got to show commitment and being there for the long haul. So thank you so much for that. In terms of living out of your own expectations, I feel like you got there pretty early in life too. So talk to me about your expectations journey and just how you communicate that to people. Because, women, like we said, there's all kinds of expectations around women. There's all kinds of expectations around women and girls that came up in early, tough, abusive environments, girls that have been sexually assaulted, how and where they should show up and what role they play and how that, whether they're going to be able to heal from that if they choose paths that will lead to healthy outcomes. All those things play a role in expectations. And you've just busted through and what you could do. So, and I feel like your mom played a role in that too. So just talk to me about your expectations journey.
Yeah, although I didn't have my heart or head set on, from a career perspective, achieving and like being a CEO one day, which I have been. Again, I thought I was going to be a lawyer growing up. But then, as I said, my love of business, and I stayed in this world. But for me, I'm not a status quo kind of person at all. So I'm always seeking out new challenge. Mm-hmm. And that has come with either more senior roles or more complex organizations and like challenges I'm solving for. So for me, this expectation was, I'm going to challenge myself. I'm going to do more and better. I didn't necessarily say it's going to be X, Y, and Z thing, or I'm going to have earned this amount of money or any of those things. It was more around, I want to do more. I want to do better. I knew I was going to do better than, again, biology or circumstance.
Sure.
My parents, super loving, but my mom was a secretary and my dad a school janitor. So she said, like, Tori, you need to do better than us. She didn't need to say that to me. Like, right. I knew I was going to.
Sure.
But then also there's these expectations, as you said, around the other elements that are outside of from a career perspective, as a wife, as a mother. And I've chosen to not let others make me feel guilty for the choices that I've made.
They're so important. I want to sit with that a minute because we are notorious as women for feeling guilty about everybody's other's expectations for that. So sit with that. I love that. Thank you for that.
Well, and it's hard. It doesn't mean I haven't felt guilty, but I'm not letting others impose additional guilt on me for the choices that I've made. People, often ask, like, how do you do it all? Which I hate that like, for me, it's just all life. And so I make choices and I believe you can have it all, the things you have conviction about, but it doesn't come without compromise, and you can't always have it all at the same time. So, good example for me was, so when I gave birth to my second child, she came a bit early. And I was planning on working till the day I gave birth. We were in the middle of a massive implementation. I was released from the hospital the same day. And she was sleeping, and I hopped back on my laptop and people were like, what are you doing? And I'm like, but that was my choice. Like, don't make me feel guilty for it. My choice to do this.
Okay.
And then a couple of years later, I had a company I worked for. We were doing tons of like acquisitions, and I was accountable for a lot of those. And so I spent pretty much 100% of the year, 220 days, which is how many business days there are generally in a year, on the road. And she was 2, my son was 6, and like I missed a lot, but those were my choices. And again, my ex-wife was there, and she had support and a nanny. But then fast forward, my ex-wife passed away from cancer 10 years ago. And I had a job that I loved in New York, but I split my time between New York and Toronto where the kids were. And I made the choice at that point after she passed away. And I was also traveling quite a lot to leave that job to go to one back, Toronto-based for me, that had me on the road less than 10% of the time, so I could be there with my children.
Wow.
Rather than uproot them and move them to New York, where they would suffer the further loss of having lost a parent, but everything else they knew around them. And so I loved that job. But that's the time where I'm like, this is the right decision for my family. Yeah. And so, going back to like expectations, I think they're going to ebb and flow over time. And I just don't let anyone set them for me.
Right.
I make the decision based upon the data and information and the circumstance at that time. And you'll hopefully make the right ones for you at that point. And so I look back and I live with no regrets. For those.
Yeah, there's a lot of power in that. A lot of power in living with no regrets and being able to have that. Again, I keep saying conviction, but that's going to be the word I take away from this conversation today. Talk to me about your why and your values in shaping those decisions, what you go back to, what helps you frame those choices you make, those boundaries you set, those expectations that you set for yourself. How do those come into play?
I'm incredibly values driven in terms like one of my let's do the right thing. And I say that a lot in business. And interestingly, that's probably where the biggest challenge comes, working for most of my career has been working for, Fortune 100 or 500 companies, publicly traded, quarter to quarter results. And I find there's often a trade-off that they're asking or implying that need to be made for short-term business results, but it's not the right thing to do in the long run for our customers, sometimes from a long-term value perspective and trust perspective, or with our employees. Sure. And so I'm always at the forefront from a values perspective of saying, like, let's do the right thing. And again, there's many compromises sometimes. Recognize that, but also into like the values I've had, and I've made some difficult decisions, even personally. So I actually left my ex-wife. We had separated a couple of years before her cancer returned, and unfortunately she passed away. And that was a very, very difficult decision for me to make because it impacted the entire family.
Yeah.
But I knew I wasn't living sort of my truth, and my full self wasn't being fulfilled.
Yeah.
And I wanted to demonstrate for my children something very different in terms of the kind of lives I would want them to lead. And so I talked to them around, they'll define what success looks like for them. They don't need to follow in my footsteps. Sometimes I think they think that's an expectation, or they feel the weight of it. And I'm clear with them, like, that's not the case. Success you will define. I said, should you choose to be partnered? I'm like, I want you to be, in this kind of relationship. And I think they see that with my husband now.
Sure.
You're going to choose a vocation and work, that affords the lifestyle that you want. My son said to me when I was pushing my older one for college entrance, I was pushing him hard. He's gifted, but a little lazy. And he points around our house and he's like, Mom, I don't need all of this. I'm fine with mediocrity. That kind of pained me a little bit, but I'm like, but buddy, I'm like, that's what I mean. Like you're going to define what that is for you.
Right.
So at the end of the day, from a values perspective, I want to know that I raised really good humans.
Yeah.
And so that's how I just kind of approach life, not only in terms of I want to do the right thing in life, whether that's in business with my children for the right reasons. And sometimes that means really difficult decisions.
Well, and I think doing the right thing doesn't always look like what other people think it will. I think there's a lot of power in what you said of, you knew you weren't living your truest, best self in that relationship. And so many times we see women make decisions about staying in relationships for the betterment of the children, or they stay in jobs where they aren't really feeling inspired. And sometimes you have to there's seasons. You talked about the change you had to make when your ex-wife passed away. And there's times and places for that, but we neglect to listen to ourselves and what we know is best. And we end up, and then we get to a certain point in your life, like, why am I so unhappy? Why am I so discontented? Why? And you didn't listen. You didn't pay attention to that voice inside you that was telling you, because you were, again, we get caught up. I've talked about this a lot, in other people's expectations or what they think or who we're going to hurt. And we put ourselves on the back burner. And by doing that, we're not setting the example for our children that we want to set, and what living a full, complete, honest, authentic life looks like. We're just showing up like a martyr, which is not what we want to be doing. That's not what we want to model. And trusting ourselves, and when we tell them, it's like, this is going to be hard, but you got to trust me on this, that this, in the long run, you're going to see the value in this and the turns that it took, and having the courage to do that. So I'm so glad you shared that, because we've got to, as women, if we don't want to end up on these pathways, like so many of us get to, where I got to at 50 years old in the ER twice in 2 weeks for bodily things happening in my physical body because of emotional and mental health trauma I had not dealt with. I put it on the back burner, other than my physical walk and run every day. But everything else was a priority. And that wasn't, what I saw. I was very eye-opening. I saw my daughters making these different decisions because of what they saw from me. And that was very humbling and very like, whoa, okay, this is an eye-opener. And so I'm so glad you spoke to that, because we ignore those voices because we don't think it's the right thing to do, when actually it's the absolute right thing to do based on what you know is best for you and what you're modeling. So I'm so glad you shared that. There's so much power in that. Accepting the layered aspects of ourselves. We all have a lot of layers. You have been very authentic about your story and open with it. And I think that gives your ability to accept those layered aspects of your life has given you the power to do what you've done. So talk to me about your layers journey. Was there a certain age or point where you knew, like, I got to dive in and accept all this stuff if I'm going to be able to move forward and live my life the way I want to?
Yeah, I thought I was doing it, and then I had this like moment where, and it was from a work perspective, I learned there was something that happened over the course, two things that happened over the course of a couple of months that just forced me to reconcile with some of this. And one was I learned my nickname was the Iron Maiden.
Oh,
and I was like, oh, ouch. And I first heard that, and I'm like, well, but I've had to do research. So some of it I was like, is probably not justified because I've been a part of 18 mergers and acquisitions where I've been leading, and there's restructuring and really difficult decisions. So I'm like, some people just probably think I'm a bitch, as a result of those things. But then there was the part of me that came when a few months later, like a colleague of mine, we were chatting about our weekends, and I said I'd seen some movie that weekend and I was bawling. I didn't have enough Kleenex in there. And she just kind of looked at me. She's like, oh, you'd be the type of person who'd laugh at people who cried at movies. That's when I realized that the reality was this perception that people had of me. And it's because I was afraid to peel the onion back and share with others those layers. Yeah. So because I was the youngest only female executive, I wasn't going to show you emotion, but also I'm not going to be vulnerable. I want you to recognize that I'm strong and I belong here. And so I walked into work and it was all business all the time. But then I wasn't getting to connect authentically with people and build. It's not like I was unfriendly or anything. It's just we're here to do business. And I didn't take that time. But also as I started coaching and mentoring more people, I wasn't telling them my story and how did I get here and why are you so driven? Why did you work the same night you gave birth? Those sorts of things. And I was like, okay, so it wasn't until actually into my late 20s into my 30s where I'm like, I need to do better. I need to do different because, my nickname that my best friend calls me is Turtle. I do have a really tough exterior. I'm incredibly resilient, but I'm all marshmallow inside. And so I need people to understand a little bit more of that, understand my why. And so that's when it shifted for me.
Okay. Yeah. And letting people in, that can be tough though. And especially when you walk into the environment you did. I think the Iron Maiden thing is so interesting. And it's one of my pet peeves that women get these labels, but men don't necessarily get those same labels for doing the same work. Was that your experience with that? Do you feel like that was unfair? So I think the nickname was in part of my own making, right? So not being in a certain way. But then there's been other times where, I've been told I'm aggressive, whereas my male counterparts are assertive, right? And I used the B word, earlier, and it's the same traits and performance of my male colleagues are applauded. And it's viewed somewhat negatively in women. And I do think that that's very real still, even, to this day, in being I'm been told I intimidate others. And I'm I'm sort of shocked. And I think some of that's the eye of the sort of beholder and watching it. But I think a lot has to do with this dynamic. I'm a strong, confident, senior executive woman. Mm-hmm. And so, that just creates in some people's minds a certain persona and language that goes along with that. Yeah. So still work to do there. But thank you for your honesty in that. And also also knowing the piece of accountability, listen, I can show up as who I am. I don't have to show up as this other persona. I can show up as authentically me and be as accessible and successful, if not more, because I've invited people in and they can see where that comes from and give them kind of some insight too. I think that has even so much more power in it. But we're not, I feel like, and I'm 53. As a woman, you had to show up like the men would show up. And I think we're finally getting to a point where we're like, no, that's not working. We need to show up like the women that we are, because that voice and that, authenticity and that empathy needs to be in place there. And there needs to along with the drive and the success and the motivation and the courage. So it's on the road there, but that's a very interesting how you got there. And I'm not surprised at all to hear that, because I think that's what a lot of us face when we go into those corporate settings. in living out feel, finding empowerment and embracing layers, which we have been talking about, which you do and continue to do so well. Talk to me about the effect that has had on your relationship with yourself, as well as your relationship with others. And you already told us a little bit about that. You really kind of, when you started letting people in a little bit more in your 30s and started seeing that, but talk to me about your journey with that and how that affects and informs the kind of relationships you have around you.
I mean, from a work perspective, I think I just described that again. Thought I needed to show up in one way. And when I started opening up, it just changed the world. I went from having, teams that maybe at times feared me to those that then followed me, as I was there. And so being a human-centered leader, which means being vulnerable, being transparent and authentic with who I am and allowing others to do the same. It drove a very different kind of relationship within the workplace that drove incredibly positive benefit to not only my team members, but the business itself.
Right.
Then on the personal side, I've seen this evolution from my early years, the desire to want to feel love because I didn't. So I put myself in situations to be with partners that maybe were good, but I wanted lots of love and attention. But I can look back and I know why I wanted it. I equated sometimes sexual attraction with love and affection. And so that took years to go, okay, they're not synonymous. They're not one and the same. And then I chose some partners who I think weren't great for me because to some extent, I think I was still trying to feel better in my own skin. And I maybe so much that I didn't deserve better. And so I had some, I had an abusive boyfriend, just before I had met my ex-wife actually. And so I think then at the time when I met her, she was much older than me, but she was good for me at that point. But then, we grew apart and, I think I was 22 when we met, she was 35. So the woman I was at 33 when I decided to leave was very, very different.
Sure.
Getting comfortable with trying to find a relationship and partners. And I dated many people before I ended up meeting my husband 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
But I just think how as I've evolved and changed and gained more confidence in who I am, who I seek out to have relationships with, has changed. And, I'm at a point where no drama. I don't invite those kind of people into my life, at all. Although I have a massive network, I'm known to be a connector of people. I have tons and tons of followers and whatnot, but my inner circle is tight.
Yeah.
Really small and tight because who I let to be in that circle and that doesn't bring in all the drama. Those are the choices that I've made based on who I want to surround myself with.
Yeah, I think that's so important. You brought up so many factors and just the growth and evolving over time that we do. And that recognition of oh, okay. And that we move through seasons, that there's nuances and multiple things going on, be able to see that and being able to move forward for that. Understand that, identify it, but not linger in it. Okay, yeah, I did that. I made that decision. This is how it was informed. This is where I'm at now. I'll move forward from here. I think that's such a great example of that. And I love your example of keeping that circle small. I think my husband and I'm borrowing this from Glennon Doyle and Abby Wambach because it's not mine. I heard it from them. They talked about it in Glennon's book. But your island of here's our island. You are welcome on our island if you love well, if you trust well, if you accept the choices we make and you're for us. You don't have to agree with everything, but we got to feel like you're on our team. The rest of you, we love you, but we'll love you from a distance. And I think I think we have to define those relationships and those people that are really going to show up for us as we go through these different seasons and that we can trust, especially when you've got a big network like yourself. My husband has a huge network. He's got a lot of people out there that think they know him really well. And I will tell you about 1% of them know him really well because he's kind of all right, I'm here and there, but on my island, these are the people I feel safe with. These are the people I trust and that I know are for me. And I think it's okay to make those choices and those delineations as we as we evolve and realize what's best and healthiest for us. So thank you for sharing that. we are down to our rapid fire. Name 5 activities that nourish you.
Weight training. That's my I work out 6 days a week. So that's one. Listening to music is another. I'm an empty nester now. My youngest just turned 19 and moved in with my older son. And so I would say it's spending time with my family, but for now, like it's like FaceTiming with them. But getting time with them is amazing. I'm a dog person, and I traveled so much for a period of time. I didn't have a dog, but I finally convinced my husband to let us get one. So my little,
you and my husband are in the same. We're the first row. I'm where your husband is, and you're where where.
So my little boy, Ashton, he's like 8.5 months. He's amazing. So he, gives me lots and lots of joy. And you know what, I realized particularly over COVID that Danny, my husband, is my person, right? The fact that 24 hours together. And so I thoroughly enjoy spending time and being with him.
Yeah, I think we learned a lot about who our people were over COVID real quick, didn't we? Oh my gosh. Okay. 5 words and how you want to feel the next 6 months. Challenged, healthy. I had a bad accident last year, so I'm going through that. Energized. Supportive in terms of the work I want to do, but supported would be the other. Sure. Was that 4 or is that 5? No. I think that's 5.
Okay.
There's another one, you can throw it out there, but I think we're good. Okay, Victoria, tell us, this is all going to be in the sources on our website at embracinglayers.com, people. So don't worry if you're driving down the freeway, you don't have to pull off to the side. This will be there for you. But talk to us about, you have a book that you're featured in. You have a website that shares all the different ways people can access your resources, how you can get coached, the blogs, the different interviews and podcasts you've been on, your story. So talk to us about all of that.
Yeah. So the website is the best way to get a hold of me. So it's victoria-pelletier.com. And from there, your listeners can choose which way they want to follow or connect with me on the various social platforms. Although, as my youngest one tells me, I'm really old because I spend more time on Facebook and I'm not on TikTok and Snapchat. So they won't find every single platform there, but a majority of them are there. And anyone who also wants to hire a public speaker, that's one of the things that gives me great joy. So they can learn more about it on the site as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. This was just such a wealth of information. I appreciate your authenticity and your vulnerability and sharing your story. It's so informative and it just gives such a clear picture on why you do the work you do. And thank you for the work you do. It's important. We need it. We need women out there fighting for each other and showing up for each other in this space and doing it with the conviction and, just living truthfully and authentically for who you are. So appreciate your time with us today and sharing those resources again. Audience, check out embracinglayers.com to see where you can learn more about Victoria, follow her, learn from her, get coached by her, whatever it is you need. But we're so encouraged by your story. So thank you for sharing this time with us today.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. All right, audience, be encouraged, be convicted, live unapologetically. And if you forget how to do that, Victoria's got resources for you. Go to embracinglayers.com. We want to support you on this, but have a great week.